Tom Francis, what is your favourite game?
My favourite game is Deus Ex. I think it was on the BBC Micro, which my dad had, and I remember playing Granny's Garden and Castle, and I think Battlezone. And Battlezone was the wireframe tank game that's probably the closest to games we now play, but I don't have many particularly fond memories of that. Don't think I played that much. Granny's Garden was like a horrible, I don't know, like pseudo-puzzle game where you wandered around. You just went to different screens of extremely low-res ASCII art and solved just total bullshit puzzles. Like, some of them were just like, oh, there's a word written on this house, and you've just got to say what the word is. That's the secret word. And others would be like, you've got to guess which tree the magic thing is behind, and it's just random, and there's no way to know, and if you fail, then Granny eats you. And then Castle was a really brutal... I guess like puzzle game where you started off in jail and you were jailed by these weird creatures that I don't remember. I couldn't figure out what they were at the time. They looked like keytars, like keyboard guitars,
yeah,
but standing on their neck. I'm sure that's not what they were meant to be. But you started in a jail cell, and it took me and my sister like weeks and weeks of just complete bafflement at this game to figure out how to get out of it. And it's like you have to take the torch off the wall, put the stool next to the door, throw the torch onto the bed, set fire to your bed, and then jump on top of the door so that the guards rush in to put out the fire, and then you slip out behind them. And it was just like completely unhelpful, gave you no hints into anything like that. And in that, like, I think because of that, it was fascinating and became like mythological. Like, it was there was no way we were ever going to complete this game. So anything new we could find in it was kind of fascinating and amazing.
Just that sense of exploration, so to speak.
Yeah, I haven't really kind of gone down that path with my future tastes, or I guess my present day tastes, because it's like once Less Punishing Thing came along, I was tempted away by those. But then I think like at that point it was probably just a kind of an interest, and then I didn't get really obsessed with them until PC gaming, and particularly Monkey Island 2 and Ultima Underworld were the first games we got for the PC, and obviously those are both brilliant in different ways. I think probably, Monkey Island's influence has definitely stayed with me and probably affected, the kind of tone I went for with Gunpoint's dialogue and things like that. But I think Ultima Underworld was the one that was kind of lighting up my brain and making me think, like, these things can feel like worlds and can be like an alternate life rather than just a thing where you're trying to get to the end or get a high score.
Like, there was more, like... With Ultima, it was certainly a world that felt unique and explorable at the time. Like, there was nothing like it.
Yeah, there was... it had the sense that it had already been there for a while before you showed up, and that when you were gone again, it would carry on. Things like, you meet orcs, and I was familiar with orcs, and I was familiar with killing orcs, but I didn't expect to be able to talk to them. And then when you talk to them, you find you can trade with them. And when you trade with them, you find they have their own inventories, that they're walking around with their own set of items. And whether or not they're willing to give you that item for this item depends on their own particular, sense of valuation. And they have their own culture and their own leaders and their own religion, I think. And they live in this like particular area of the dungeon. It's kind of like, it would be charitable to call it a town, but it was a place where they all had bedrolls and stuff and campfires, and this idea that like the monsters in a game have their own culture and have their own lives outside of their interactions with you was completely new to me.
After Ultima, and Monkey Island, what other games after that kind of stuck out for you just before Deus Ex, anyways?
I remember absolutely loving Crusader No Remorse, which was an isometric shoot 'em up where you're a sort of futuristic commando who's I can't remember the plot really, but there's been like a rebellion, and you're one of the sort of stormtroopers for the oppressive government, and you're kind of in the process of playing the game. You decide to join the rebels and realize that like you're on the wrong side. But it was isometric, like 2D rendered graphics, and the weapons were just insane. It actually had loads of really rich environmental interactions. If you just fired a machine gun at a room, almost everything you hit would set fire or erupt or break. And then you could do things like if you shot a gas pipe, gas would leak out. But then later on, you'd get like freeze pipes that would leak liquid nitrogen, and if that hit a guard, it would freeze him solid, and then you could shatter him. And if there's a barrel, obviously standing up barrels, you can shoot them and they explode. And then if there's a barrel on its side, then when you shoot it, it actually rolls first. So you could roll a barrel into a group of enemies and blow them all up. And it had things like remote-controlled ambulatory mines that you could steer and walk them into enemy lines. Breakable glass everywhere. There was a gun that was like a rapid-fire shotgun rocket launcher. So it fired like 5 missiles at a time, fully automatic in a spread. It just kind of annihilated rooms. And it was an amazingly advanced kind of forerunner of all the most destructive power fantasies that games would eventually grow into. And the only thing about it that wasn't sort of amazingly futuristic was the control scheme was awful. It was purely keyboard based. You could only sort of point yourself in one of the cardinal directions, so aiming guns was a nightmare. And I think it was just really kind of juddery and strange to control. But yeah, it was kind of set in office blocks a lot of the time, and I think that's part of a continuing fascination I have with games that are about danger and guns and lethal situations, but that are set in more relatable locations.
When you say it like that, the first thought that kind of pops into my mind for some reason is Die Hard when you say that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we haven't really had a good Die Hard game, have we?
No, we haven't. Like, when was the last Die Hard game? It was the Die Hard collection, wasn't it, on PS1?
I don't know.
There might have been one since.
I'm almost entirely PC exclusive, so I think all of the Die Hard games were in console only, so...
Yeah.
I'm a bit out of touch.
Okay. No, fair enough. So, as we get after the Deus Ex era, like, that was more or less around the time you started popping into the industry side of things. So, let's touch on that.
So actually, the time I got involved in games journalism would have been... around the time of Deus Ex, I was a massive fan of PC Zone, which was at the time the only PC games magazine in the UK. And I was really obsessed with that. I was read it from cover to cover every month, and fantasized about being about working for a magazine like that and getting to play games and write about them for a job. But then completely shelved that and forgot about it because it was clearly an impossible dream. And then the time when I actually got involved with games journalism was actually around the time of Deus Ex 2, because the demo for that had just come out, and the game itself hadn't launched, but it was kind of causing a big fuss. People were, bitching about the small level sizes and all the consolification that it had gone through. And I'd been playing it myself, and I had a lot of the same thoughts of various things it didn't do that Deus Ex 1 did. But I'd also played it to death, and it was just a very short section of the game, but I played it inside out, and I knew everything about it, and I'd modded it. I'd edited the INI files to change the damage multipliers to make them more like how I wanted. And then when I was the position I applied for at PC Gamer was as a disc editor, and it wasn't a job I had any qualifications for really. Nothing. I didn't know anything about making that. Meant putting together the cover disc each month, which means kind of working with a Macromedia Flash interface and trawling the internet for demos and movies and things, and sort of deciding which things are worth putting on there. But luckily, in the interview, they kind of just asked me more or less what you're asking me, like what are your favorite games and what do you like to play and stuff. And because the Deus Ex 2 demo had just come out, I told them about other favorite games of mine and Deus Ex itself, but then got on to talking about the Deus Ex 2 demo, and I think I just sort of ranted for about 25 minutes about all of the valid complaints people had, but also like how much amazing stuff there was in that set of tools and all the things you could do with it that people weren't appreciating because they got so hung up on these other problems. And so I was telling stories about like disintegrating windows and throwing spider mines in and tricking enemies into fighting each other. And I found out later that they had some fairly serious concerns about my ability to actually do the job, but they were so they thought I was just so enthusiastic that I would fit in well. And so I think me ranting about the Deus Ex 2 demo probably got me the job.
Lesson learned, kids. Always rant about your favorite games, or the critical sequels, anyways.
Yeah.
So it was around 2 odd years ago you left PC Gamer.
Yep.
With what happened with Gunpoint? Like, what drove you to make Gunpoint at first? Because obviously, like before you left PC Gamer, like you took a sabbatical to finish Gunpoint. But like at that point of starting Gunpoint, like what drove you to make it essentially?
So this was about 3 years before it came out, so about 5 years ago. It was Spelunky that actually kind of... I'd always wanted to make games. I'd like after the point where I was fantasizing about being a games journalist, and after I'd given up on that. But before I actually did become a games journalist, there was like the period after university when I was thinking about what I was going to do. I tried things like I wrote a sci-fi TV script, and I wrote a design document for a game, and I tried a couple other things, like things you can just sort of not necessarily do by yourself, but things where you can sort of investigate whether or not it's for you, you know. And writing was a big one. But when I was writing a design document for a game, it was complete bullshit because I had never made a game. I didn't know what's possible and what wasn't. So it was all just pie in the sky stuff. But just the process of coming up with those systems was incredibly exciting to me. And so, again, I gave up on that dream. Gave up on 2 of my dreams. And thought, well, I'll become an accountant or an insurance person because I need actual money. And I, don't have any sort of route into the games industry. But it was always in the back of my head that I'd love to make games. And the more I wrote reviews and other kind of analytical articles about game design, the more I found myself sort of thinking, I know how to fix this. Like, I know what you can do differently to make this work. And in some cases, it would be like, I wish you would do it like these other developers do it. But then in some cases, it would be like, why hasn't any developer done this? Why, like, I've never seen it done this way. Why doesn't someone do that? Because I'm sure it would work. And it started to get sort of a little bit frustrating because I had to rein that in. It's not very good to waste a review kind of espousing your own ideas for game designs. And it was annoying. I knew I was bullshitting. I knew I was just... spouting opinions without any experience to back them up. And so I wanted to get that experience. But I always assumed there was no way to do it by yourself. You would need to join a team. You'd need to organize it. You'd need to start at the bottom and work your way up to become a designer. And so it would be years of work I wasn't interested in to get to the point where I'd ever get to sort of have an idea and try it out and see if it worked. And it wasn't really until I played Spelunky that I thought... this actually seemed doable. Like, Spelunky was the first game where it was one of my top 10 games of all time from very quickly, within the first few hours of playing it. And it also, although I didn't think I could make that exactly, it showed me that with fairly, like, simple ingredients, you can make something that genuinely lasts forever and is brilliant and is better than so many AAA games. Until that point, there were plenty of indie games I loved and that were among my favorite games, particularly Introversion stuff. But when I looked at Introversion stuff, I never thought I could do that. It was always, I could never do that. It would take a team of even people far smarter and more competent than me. It would still take a team of 20 of them to do what Chris DeLay does. And Derek here is a design genius and also a brilliant artist, and also he does damn nearly everything and has loads of talents that I don't. But I didn't look at Spelunky and think this is a masterful feat of programming. Like, even though it is well coded, it was just not a massively, impossibly ambitious project. It was like something that somebody had programmed to. I don't know if Derek even sort of thinks of himself as a programmer, because he ended up hiring a programmer to do the Xbox version of Spelunky. And so I sort of felt like his genius was in the design. The thing he'd done that was astonishing and amazing was the way he had designed it. And that was the thing that I wanted to test. I didn't know if I'd be any good at it, but I wanted to know whether that was possible. And Splunky taught me that you wouldn't have to hire a programmer to find out if you're a good game designer. You could probably just try something like that. And I didn't know how the random generation worked, and I didn't have any confidence that I'd ever be able to do that. But I thought, if this shows that simple ideas can be properly brilliant if the design is good enough, and so that's something I can just find out. I can just try that. And I heard it was made in Game Maker, which sounds like it's aimed at beginners, and it is. And so I looked up Game Maker. I followed some tutorials, and that was Gunpoint. Basically, like the first test project I started, it was just a brown blob jumping around some black squares, but that was the project file that eventually turned into Gunpoint.
Like before it came out, like you were still on sabbatical as you were finishing them up. Like, was there a worry there, like in the back of your mind that there was this worry in the back of your head that this may not pan out as successfully as I want it to be, or was it just, if this doesn't come out as well as it can be, then oh well, I tried, I can go back to PC Gamer. And
it was very much that, really. I've been very, very careful throughout the whole thing to not risk anything on it except my spare time. And so the only money I'd spent was to go to GDC one year and, to buy Game Maker. And everyone else who's working on it was working for royalty share, as was I. And so it was always the case that, if this bombs, then I know that this career is probably not for me, or at least this is not the way into it. And I was very careful to keep my job. I took a sabbatical instead of quitting my job, so that if it did fail, I could just go back. I didn't want to. By the end of it, I didn't want to do what I was doing then, which was the only the thing that wasn't appealing was, if this fails, I don't want to go back to my job and start a new game from scratch in my spare time again and still be working 2 jobs for another 3 years just to get anything out the door, just to find out if I can improve on this. So I think I was sort of thinking that if it didn't work out, I would probably stop there, or maybe I'd still keep tinkering in my spare time just to learn, but I wouldn't have a big ongoing project like that where there's pressure to finish it and it consumes your life, because that was taking its toll on me, and I definitely wanted to be done with that.
After it's out, it's done successfully. You've left PC Gaming. You'd made more than enough money to kind of last you for the next few years. So, what was that kind of feeling of freedom like, so to speak? I imagine George Michael playing in the background.
It was very very exciting, but it was kind of spread out over a few weeks, because there was the period where the game was available to pre-order and the demo was out, but the game itself wasn't out. And that was, at that point, it was kind of very exhilarating to see the sales climb and to see them get good, but also very, very uncertain. It was much more money than I thought I would make from it in this period of time, but it was still less than I would like it to make in total, ever, which is, what you'd expect. But it was impossible to know, from this 1 week sales, what does that mean for my 1 year sales? That I didn't really have a very good concept of that. And so it was still very uncertain. And it, right before the game itself launched, it was getting to the point where I was thinking, okay, this is probably enough sales that I can quit my job, and this isn't enough to live on for the whole duration of another game's development cycle, but it's enough that it suggests that I'll keep making some money, and that will keep me afloat. And then when it came out, it did. It sort of all went up by an order of magnitude, and it was way more successful than the early sales would have predicted. And so that was just that became a very easy decision. It was well, obviously I should quit then, because this is enough that I could actually relax a bit and take a break if I want, and take my time over the next thing. But yeah, so it happened in stages. So by the time it really clinched it that I was definitely going to do it, I was already strongly considering doing it, and so it wasn't one big moment of oh my god, holy shit, it all just happened this instant. It was much more 2 weeks of kind of gradually ramping up my expectations and letting my hopes get a bit higher, and finally realizing that it's going to happen, and then eventually making the decision to hand in my notice. And the timing was such that I didn't have to go back to the job, so I released it like a month before my sabbatical was over, so I had the 4 weeks notice that I had to give. I think technically I should have gone back for 1 day. I think my notice period was such that I should have gone back to PC Gamer for 1 day after my 3-month break to have my last day, but I didn't do that. And that was in itself quite exciting, because it's a massive amount of freedom, but also kind of daunting in some ways, because it was like, now the whole rest of my life is completely, I have to do it all myself. Like, everything that happens from now on, I have to manually sort of make it happen. I'm no longer, there's no workplace I can show up to and they'll tell me what to do. I'm going to have to take control of everything.
Let's get to your favourite game then, Deus Ex. So, like, how did you first come across Deus Ex? Like, what kind of got you excited to play the game? I
think it must have been, it was certainly the demo, and I think it was probably on a demo disc, and probably PC Zone's demo disc, if it was ever on there. And I played it, and I didn't like it.
I wanted to ask you about that, because you had mentioned previously that you got off with the wrong foot on it, basically, at first.
Yeah, it was something like I think I was just like running up to the guards, firing wildly, just treating it like a shooter, and you can miss at absurdly close range in this game. And it's the kind of thing that, you know, even today, if I played a game where that was true, if I wasn't appropriately prepared for what kind of game it was supposed to be, I think even today I would be like, oh, this is fucking bullshit. I was like 5 feet away and I fired and I still missed, and my cursor was dead on his head. I should have won that. And so stuff like that was annoying me, and I was just restarting and doing the same thing again and again. And my takeaway was like, this game is absurdly, brutally hard, and it doesn't seem like it's really for me. But I think I was just sort of, maybe there wasn't much else to play, or maybe I was just kind of intrigued by how hard it was. And so I kept on messing around with it, and eventually learnt about stealth, and not necessarily attracting the attention of everybody all the time. There was a training bit, wasn't there, that kind of explicitly taught you about stealth, and I definitely didn't play that before I played the game. I don't know if that was in the demo or whether it wasn't, but I just kind of kept bashing my head against the game itself and getting killed repeatedly, because you can die in one shot. And then sort of just slowly got the hang of it and started to avoid people and skirt around people, and it still wasn't really, really clicking for me. It wasn't like I wasn't thinking, wow, this is incredible, until I kind of I got most of the way up the inside of the Statue of Liberty, which is the demo level, and there's a bit where I sort of slipped past a bunch of guards, taking out individual ones, and there were 2 guards in front of me talking, and they were just standing there, and there wasn't really any way to get past them without either of them seeing me, because they were facing each other, so they kind of covered the whole area. And I was trying to think, like, by that stage I knew the mechanics well enough to know that if I walk right up to someone and point my gun in their face and they press fire, then they definitely die. But I can't do that quickly enough that I can be sure the other guy won't kill me while I'm doing it. I can't kill 2 of them that way. And I was just looking through my inventory, and I realized I had a fire extinguisher, and so I equipped that, and I stepped out and sprayed the fire extinguisher in both their faces, and then headshotted each one of them while they were choking on the fire extinguisher stuff. And that was the moment it clicked. I suddenly sort of saw the whole thing in a completely different light and realized it was about coming up with tactics like this and improvising with what you have and figuring out how to use a wider set of tools than just guns to get around problems that are basically impossible with just guns.
Well, we'll touch upon back on the game in a little bit, but like getting to the kind of developer side of things with Ion Storm, like had you played any of the previous stuff like Ion had done like before Deus Ex, like especially like Daikatana came out like just before Deus Ex, if I remember correctly.
I don't think I ever played Daikatana. I was following it in the press, and I was aware of it as. I don't think I was ever excited about it, really. There were previews, and I know they were making a big deal of it and marketing it heavily, but I wasn't all that interested. And then I don't think I ever played it when it actually came out. So I don't think I'd ever played anything by Iron Storm before this.
Obviously, the only part of marketing that I would remember from Daikatana is obviously the famous John Romero was about to make his bitch kind of advertisement. Oh dear. Like, I think he said himself, like, he really regrets doing that now.
Yep.
It's not just Romero that was at the studio. There was also Tom Hall there as well. Like, kind of, it was basically Romero and Hall at the studio coming over from id Software, but also as well, like, there was Warren Spector, there was also Harvey Smith and Jordan Thomas, and, like, that's a very powerful set of alumni right there. Like, just touch upon that, basically.
Yeah, I remember thinking, I remember finding out that someone, I actually don't remember who, I was looking at the credits list for Ultima Underworld, which is one of my first games I got really excited about, and Deus Ex and System Shock 2, which I was a massive fan of, and a bunch of others. And I sort of discovered of my own volition that, you know, there was this kind of like holy set of people who'd like, there wasn't really one person who'd been involved in all of them, but there was like a family of people, and each one of them had been involved with like 3 or 4 of these games, and they were so exactly my kind of games. And I remember realizing like, oh, these people like understand something about games that I really respond to, and they like the things they make are my kind of thing. But I didn't really. I'm always kind of less aware of that stuff than maybe I should be in terms of who worked on what. I keep forgetting which of those people worked on which of those games. And even now that I'm lucky enough to know some of them, I still kind of forget sometimes who they've worked with and stuff. Like I was at GDC. I know Jordan Thomas quite well these days, but I didn't know David Pittman that well, who's the creator of Eldritch, and I introduced them to each other, and then I realized that David worked for Jordan on BioShock 2. That's like for quite some time. And so yeah, I often lose track of like who's responsible for what. But yeah, I'm definitely conscious of this list of people who are having incredible track records, and that it's basically immersive sims. That's the kind of the common thread. And Ultima Underworld was an immersive sim in a sense. It was also an RPG, and it's kind of more often categorized that way. But it certainly kind of led to all these other games like System Shock and ultimately Deus Ex.
Specifically Warren Spector, then. Like, I interviewed Spector this year, not necessarily for, you know, his past games, but more of his brand new role at the Dennis Sam's Gaming Academy in Austin. But like, I'm assuming you've obviously interviewed him a few times on Deus Ex while you were at PC Gamer, and
No, I never have actually.
oh really? Ah, okay. Ah, well, I thought you would have.
I've never met him either.
Oh. Is it, like, obviously you would like the interview though, I would guess, son. Like, as even or even just chat to him about Deus Ex, just kind of curiosity of what worked, what didn't, and what.
Yeah, in some ways, I think like at the time I really would have. These days, I feel like it's probably the last thing he wants to hear. Like he's probably been asked all the questions I could ask a million times, and there is like a huge wealth of info out there. You know, there's talks he's given, and there's probably more info out there than I have consumed that I could about the making of that game. And I don't really know that much about the making of it, but I often get the impression that there's an element of chance to how it came together, and that there's a lot of things that they did as a kind of unhappy compromise that ended up making the game work really well. Like Warren Spector said something to the effect of, like everything Deus Ex does, it does quite badly, but it just does a lot of different things, and it's that breadth that makes it work. And there's some stuff like the way stealth works in Deus Ex. I prefer to the way stealth works in dedicated stealth games like Thief and Splinter Cell. And I think it's a product of the crudeness of the stealth system. Basically, enemies can barely see you from more than about 20 meters, and you can just get away with absurd things. And that, I think, is a compromise made because they didn't have time to make a proper, fully fledged stealth system. But it ends up working better than other systems that were more sophisticated because it's less of a challenge, and so it kind of gets in the way less. And the stealth games I love now are things like Far Cry 3 and more recently Metal Gear Solid 5. And these are games that give you an insane amount, and Deus Ex Human Revolution, all of which give you massive stealth advantages. So enemies can see you better in those games, but in Human Revolution, you can hug a wall and then it goes into third person and you can just see over the wall. So you can see everything and they can't see you at all. And so you get these grossly unfair advantages. In Metal Gear, if you've got the dog, I mean, even without the dog, you can look through binoculars and tag everyone like you can in Far Cry 3 and 4. And after you've tagged them, you can see them through walls at all times. You have perfect intel about them all the time. And in Metal Gear, if you have the dog, you also automatically tag people who are anywhere near you. So you basically never have to worry about being surprised by anyone ever again. And these are crazy things. Like Thief didn't have anything like that. And the old school stealth games didn't have those things. And Deus Ex didn't have anything like that, but it just made stealth really easy by just making people virtually blind. And so I think it's kind of partly chance that works so well. I don't really know, of course, but I kind of... So when I think about Deus Ex, I sort of see it as a happy coincidence that it worked so well, and less that it's Warren Spector as auteur genius made it all work perfectly with, masterful foresight and stuff.
You said yourself, like, you perhaps don't know as much about making of the game than you should have. But I do want to ask, like, development started, like, from around, or Spectre got the initial concept in around 93, back when he was still at Looking Glass, and in fact, like, the kind of initial development started at Looking Glass before it bled through the Ion Storm, like, and then pre-development at Ion Storm started around 97, and the game came out in 2000. Like, how do you think that game could have been, certainly in terms of influence, or certainly how do you think Deus Ex could have come out around 1993, let's say, rather than 2000, back when there was 2000 was around post Metal Gear era anyways. So, like, I want to know, like, how much. I'm trying to find the words of how to phrase this question correctly, but how do you think Deus Ex would have panned out in the early 90s anyways, before it did eventually come out in the early 2000s even? So
do you mean if it was released in that state, or if it was released in its actual state but just much earlier?
Just released much earlier, basically.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the thing that struck me for ages after Deus Ex came out was that the frustrating way in which it sort of failed to influence anyone. Like, for ages afterwards, it was just, like, almost became a running joke, because when is anyone going to make anything like Deus Ex? Because nothing seemed to come anywhere close. And it was quite a long time before anyone even before I started hearing people say that they wanted to make something like Deus Ex. Because as far as I recall, it wasn't massively commercially successful on launch. I'm sure it's been had a great long tail. But it wasn't sort of revered as like the massive blockbuster hit of the decade or anything. And then once I was kind of getting into games journalism and writing about this stuff, it was a common refrain where we would just ask ourselves, like, why aren't there more games like Deus Ex? Why aren't people making this stuff? And then I feel like the next time I can really remember playing a game that felt like it had that DNA was BioShock. Which, of course, does sort of have a lineage going back to those immersive sims. And then since BioShock, it actually feels like BioShock was the one that sort of said, hey, you can make a Deus Ex-y game, but also be massively commercially successful, and it can work as an action game, and it can you can have it both. You can have it both ways, basically. You can have mainstream success and have critical acclaim and all these rich, interesting systems. So my impression, I might be completely wrong, but it didn't feel like Deus Ex was having a huge influence on people for years afterwards, and it sort of felt like it took another game to come along and show people that you could do it with commercial chops.
Basically, essentially, with Bioshock, it showed you could have your cake and eat it. Essentially.
Yeah.
So I want to touch upon the locations in the game as well. Like there was New York, Paris, Hong Kong, just to name a few, and there was all those as well, like Area 51 as well. Like you talked about exploring the world of Ultima for the first time when you were first getting into games. So like, how was exploring like Deus Ex's world at that time for you?
It was great. I really loved the like I said about Crusader. There's something about more real world locations that I really respond to, and it's not that I want games to be just about real life. I want them to be about these thriller type situations, but I like them to be set in the real world because it's a more believable fantasy, and I can get more. Basically, I just really want to be a spy, and Deus Ex really sold the spy fantasy by having all of these places that were, I wouldn't say they were that recognizable to me. I hadn't been to most of them, and they also had this sort of very clunky or very chunky sort of square feel that games of that era generally did. But just by telling you, hey, you're in Paris now, or oh hey, you got to go to Hong Kong now, it gave it this globe-trotting feel, and you felt like you were, just flying around the world to wherever the mission took you. And then it had these sort of hub levels, like Hell's Kitchen, and I forget where it is exactly in Hong Kong, but the sort of the labyrinth of markets and canals and stuff in Hong Kong, where you weren't in any danger. You could get into trouble, but you were free to walk around until you tried to do something illegal and talk to people, and it was basically an RPG for a little while, and it would become almost like a different game. And that stuff was the main thing I was responding to in Deus Ex, was the sort of wealth of tactical options and how you can approach combat situations. But I did love that level of background detail and just that variety. I remember finding in Hong Kong, actually, yeah, one of my favorite bits of the sort of explory side of it was Maggie Chow's apartment in Hong Kong, who has like a sort of penthouse above a hotel, and it's got a secret base in it. If you find the way to open the secret door, and you can get the Dragon's Tooth sword in there, and there's MJ-12 troopers and stuff. But before you do that, you're a guest of hers, and her maid asks you to wait in the lobby, and you have a very kind of like spy-like experience that I wasn't used to in games. And out on her balcony, that encounter can play out in all sorts of ways. You can either get into her secret base or not. You can get discovered doing that or not. You can get in a direct fight with her and kill her, or if you leave her alive, she shows up later. But I think in the course of one of the fight with her, or maybe it was with the MJ-12 troops, I think I'd fucked up the sneaking into the secret base part, and I tripped a laser wire, and I just sprinted out. I ran past Maggie Chow, I smashed her window open with a crowbar, and then I saw a balcony across the street, and I just threw myself across the gap and landed on this balcony, and got away from the troops. And then the only place I could go from there was to open the balcony door. And I got inside there and started snooping around, and found a shotgun and a computer, logged into the computer, and I found out it was Jock's apartment, who's your helicopter pilot. And I just by chance thrown myself onto his balcony and broken into his house.
Oops. Just say oops, essentially.
Yeah, I had that sense of, that guy who flies me around everywhere, he lives somewhere.
With Deus Ex, it was essentially with games, certainly for my generation, because I got into games around 97, so just before Deus Ex, but I more or less associate games within the past decade when it comes to this. But with Deus Ex, the key word for it was choice, and
yeah,
choice is such a marketing term these days in games. It's just bewildering. But with Deus Ex, it literally meant it. When I associate the word choice, it just the first thing my mind just thinks of is just story, and or with certain games, I don't know. But with Deus Ex, it wasn't just choice with story, but choice in how you played more or less the game.
Yeah, there were critical plot choices, but they were never really the most interesting thing to me. There were a couple of things where it was really surprising to learn, oh, you can not do that, or this guy can survive, or that kind of stuff. But a lot of that stuff was either very simple, or it was kind of badly handled. Like the thing where your brother is injured in the hotel and you get ambushed. You can go to extraordinary lengths to try and save him. You can wipe out all of the troops who come to kill him, and it's really difficult. You're absolutely surrounded. You have to use all your tactical genius and stuff. But after you've done that, if you leave through the window, he dies. And if you leave through the door, he lives, even if you left everyone else alive. It's just which exit you go through. So that branching stuff was impressive that it was in there at all, but it's actually quite badly handled in some ways. And yeah, the thing I was much more excited about was the much more kind of much less binary choices where you have a huge possibility space that you can explore, and in particular how to infiltrate this building is the kind of the most exciting bit. I think that almost my favorite bit of most Deus Ex levels is the start, where you are, instead of being dumped into the building, you are usually arrive at the grounds of the building, and you can go entirely around the building in 360 degrees and climb on top of it, or get on top of neighboring buildings. And how you actually get inside is completely up to you. And that stuff, I guess that does boil down to a sort of discrete number of entrance points. You know, there will be a vent here, and there'll be a glass roof here, and a window here, and a locked door there, and a locked door there, and a sentry guard there. And those are sort of the sum total of the ways you can ultimately get in. But the way it can actually unfold with roaming guards and with whatever tools you happen to have with you, which entrances those that give you access to and which ones they don't, it feels like a much larger possibility space than that. It feels like it's almost infinite amounts of possible ways it can go. And in particular, I remember I loved I think it's the Vandenberg base, where they dump you on the roof and there's a skylight there, but if you walk over a little bit further you can find a maintenance hatch, or you can just slide off the roof completely and go back into the grounds and circle around there. And there are just so many ways into that building, and each one leads you to a different part of the building. And I think there's kind of stuff to do all throughout that building and all throughout the surrounding ones, and so which tasks you can do first depends on which way you came in. And then once you've done those objectives, how you get out, that's going to go through one of those entrance ways again. And yeah, I love that sense of freedom. That's the thing that it really hasn't been surpassed that I can think of. And Deus Ex Human Revolution I absolutely love, and I was really in two minds as to whether to pick that or this for my favorite game, because I go back and forth. And I think that one's much more appealing in a tactile way. It has much better feel, and almost all of the options you can do are more fun to do than they are in Deus Ex 1. But the one thing it doesn't have that Deus Ex 1 has is that sense of like massive space, just having these huge areas and being able to go anywhere you like in them and figure out from there, how do I get to my objective, or is there a better way around, and can I circle all the way around and find new ways in. And Human Revolution does have a lot of routes, and it does a very good job of that, much better than most games. But I didn't feel like it quite had that sense of total freedom, that sense of space.
You're obviously a massive fan of the systems of that game, because it's certainly an influence on what you've been making, like with Heat Signature and with Gunpoint. Like the options that Deus Ex gives you, stealth or go and guns blazing, or just even like pure dialogue. Because for me, obviously there's I should disclose up front, like a baseline for me in terms of the series is Human Revolution, and the fact you can use one of them or even all three, depending on certain circumstances, it's just amazing, like how you could do that. Like I remember a very unique demo of Human Revolution, or not unique, but it was certainly unique to me in the way it was presented, in that you, like, Eidos Montreal, it was Gamescom, and they were presenting Human Revolution, and they presented 3 ways to play the game. It was just stealth, guns blazing or just dialogue. It was in Detroit, I remember. I think it was Jean-Francois Dugas and Jonathan Jacques Bellet that was in there in the demo room, and they were just demoing these 3 ways to play. But like going back to Deus Ex 1, like I remember, like I was reading your Human Revolution review for PC Gamer, and I remember how you first kind of started out that review with an anecdote of how you managed to use these kind of a combination of these systems in kind of getting past security guards. Like,
yeah,
like are there any other similar anecdotes that you want, like along those lines, that you want to give that are from Deus Ex 1 that you can remember, anyways?
Yeah, I have a few, and they tend to be, I think that that kind of 3 paths thing. That's something that has become quite popular now. I think with Deus Ex, I guess I probably did those early on. I mean, I didn't really ever do a guns blazing, because I guess that was my first attempts, and that's when I thought it was a really difficult shooter, and I kind of hated it. And one of the unique things about Deus Ex that hasn't been echoed in things like BioShock or Human Revolution or modern takes on the same thing is that the direct approach kind of wasn't viable. It was the direct approach killed you, and that was what forced you to think of these clever approaches. And so I would come up with play styles each time I played, and I'd come up with sort of rules for myself, like instead of pure stealth and avoidance, or like pure non-lethal, I would try being stealthy but lethal. So no one's allowed to see me, but if I'm in danger of being seen, I'm allowed to kill them, and as long as it's quiet and as long as no one else hears and stuff like that. And one of them was I'm not allowed to directly attack anyone, so like a coward playthrough, where it's okay if people die, but I can't pull the trigger and I can't hit them directly. I have to like trigger a turret to attack them or trick their enemies into attacking them. And I think it was during that playthrough when on Liberty Island again, I was at the terminal that unlocks the door to Gunther's cell. He's been locked up there. It's like a side objective to rescue him. And from that terminal, you can access. There's a turret. There's the door to the cell, and there's a camera, and you can look through the camera. And on the camera, you can see yourself. You can see yourself at the terminal because it's in front of the camera that's pointing at it. And while I was looking at myself and while I was figuring out how to open the door, a guard ran into the room and pointed his gun at me. And the game isn't paused when you're using a terminal, but they didn't want you to die without knowing why. And so no one is allowed to shoot you while you're looking at a terminal. But if you're looking through a camera and you're watching the guy, you can see him not shooting you. And so he just stands there with you at gunpoint, and he won't do anything as long as you use the computer. But as soon as you stop, he's going to immediately fire, and at that range, he's going to immediately kill me. He's going to be aiming at my head, he's going to hit, and I'm dead. So I have to stay in the computer and have to figure out what I can do to deal with this. And there's a turret in the room. So I thought, okay, I'll set the turret to attack enemies, and it'll deal with him. But unfortunately, he was standing right in front of the door to Gunther's cell, and the turret couldn't shoot past a corner of the wall that was in the way. So there was solid level geometry between the gun and him. And so the gun could fire at him all day, but it wouldn't ever actually kill him. And so I was thinking, shit, what the hell can I do? Because my options are actually pretty limited here. I've only got the buttons I can press on this computer, and that's the only thing I can use to save myself. And then I realized, well, there's only one other button I can press, and it's open the door. And the door swings open, and it swings open outwards. And when it did so, it pushed the guard away from the door and out into the open where the turret shot him. It's like that was a little microcosm of Deus Ex's systems all, meshing together. Because it was actually quite unusual at that time to have kind of physics of any kind. And its physics was very crude. You couldn't have like tumbling crates or anything. Everything had to sort of stay upright. But things could push each other, and an opening door would push a character. And there was no real reason for that particular terminal to give you access to a camera, because obviously it was showing you the area you're already in, so you didn't need to see it. But they just kept those systems consistent throughout. So if there's a terminal and there are security cameras, the terminal lets you access the security cameras. And they wanted the camera there so that the turret could see you, and all those things kind of came into play. And I often think that the best moments in Deus Ex were not when you have infinite options, but when you start with those infinite options, and then they get taken away from you by circumstance, and things go wrong, and unexpectedly difficult problems arise. And because the obstacles are so harsh, the damage enemies do is so enormous. Those hard obstacles kind of cut down your options, and then when you're left with only a few, sometimes it's someone walks around a corner, and because you know they're going to kill you if you don't immediately kill them, you have to kill them, and that's a kind of a boring option. But sometimes when it cuts down, if your possibility space was big enough to begin with, if you take a random chunk out of that by just unforeseen circumstance, sometimes what you're left with is something really obtuse, like I'm going to solve this problem by opening a door, or I'm going to throw something at this thing. I saw a video once of someone who killed Anna Navarra by dropping multi-tools on her head, because he had 20 multi-tools, and I guess they do like 1 damage each when they land on her, and that wasn't enough, but he could drop them on her head from where he was standing and pick them back up. And so he just dropped them endlessly on her head and killed her. There was one other where just like a really, really basic thing that really made me sort of appreciate Deus Ex's systems-driven approach to everything was in some kind of air base, I think. There's like a helipad, and the control room for the helipad is locked, and I couldn't find the key for it. And I think maybe it was one you couldn't hack with multi-tools. And I was standing the other side of this locked door trying to figure out how to open it, trying to figure out if I could blow it up, if it's explosives and stuff. And then I just heard footsteps beyond it, and I thought, well, I've got my silenced weapon, but I've also still got the old unsilenced weapon. And if I just take out the standard unsilenced pistol and just fire it, then the guard hears the shot, and the guard has the key to the door, so the guard unlocks the door himself, and then he comes through, and I just take out the guard, and then I'm in. And that was like really simple manipulating of systems, but probably wasn't an intended solution by the developers. Might have been, I suppose. But it felt like a natural consequence of all the rules presented to me, and it felt like it wasn't like a puzzle that had been set up for me to solve. It was just, I just thought of a way around this. And that was kind of, although Gunpoint was inspired by, like, the thing that made me decide to make Gunpoint was Spelunky, my objective with Gunpoint was to try and capture some of what I like about Deus Ex. And before I knew what the hacking system would be, and before I came up with the idea for the crosslink and that kind of stuff, it was just going to be an infiltration game. And my sort of standard for how it would work was, you've got to be able to fire a gun to attract a guard who will open a door for you. And that is still possible in Gunpoint. But that kind of simple manipulation of quite conventional elements to create an unconventional solution was something I really wanted to get.
Like with Deus Ex, was there never an option to try and play the game non-lethally as much as you could?
Yeah, you can't in Deus Ex 1 you can't get through it without killing anybody, because there's I think like their intention was to force you to kill about 4 or 5 people, but the community has found ways around it. Like there's a bit where if you haven't killed Anna Navarra by the time you go back to UNATCO HQ, then you can't get out of the building because Alex Jacobson won't give you the key because he's scared of Anna, and so you have to kill her before he'll give you the key, and that's the only key to that door. It can't be hacked, it can't be blown up. But someone figured out that when you confront Anna Navarra, you can throw a gas grenade at her, and it won't kill her, but she'll try and get out of the blast radius. So she'll run away, and if you throw gas grenades in the right place, she'll try and run through the door, and she's got the key to the door, so she'll open it for you, and then you can get out that way. So you don't have to kill Anna Navarra. I think it's true that you don't have to kill Gunther. And I feel like there's more than one person you have to kill, but one person I know of that, as far as I've been told, you always have to kill is the guy at Area 51 missile silo. He's just like standing on a crane. He's just like the administrator of that facility, and for some reason he has to die before the game will progress. But yeah, like in terms of the actual normal enemies in normal situations, you can always get past them. I haven't checked, but I think it's possible to totally ghost it, so no one ever is even alerted to your presence. And Yeah, obviously, like Deus Ex Human Revolution was, they kind of dropped the ball on that because it was very strange the way the bosses worked out for that, because they have an achievement in the game for never killing anyone, but the achievement had to specify bosses don't count because the game does force you to kill bosses, and it's not even sort of elegantly done. Like, your character just does it in the cutscenes, just without your permission. He'll just kill the bosses, and apparently they're fixing that for the next one because it did cause a lot of uproar.
A lot of brouhaha. So JC Denton as a protagonist, like how did you feel about him as a protagonist compared to Adam Jensen or Alex D?
I like him. He sort of adapts to what you want him to be, and they, did a good job of not giving him too much personality until you've told him what to say. In the intros and conversations with your brother and stuff, he's just very down to business. Something about his voice makes him more likable than most protagonists, because like the two protagonist types I really hate that are very common in games are the macho asshole who's just kind of a jerk to people, and the doe-eyed idiot who just walks around bleary saying, what's going on? What's happening here? And neither of those people are people I want to be. And JC Denton did a good job of, like, he does have to ask a lot of questions. Like, that's comes with the job of being a protagonist, is the player needs to know stuff, and so you've got to go around and ask people stuff. But I think he was kind of cool. He had a casual way of asking people stuff that didn't make him sound like, what's happening? But also didn't make him sound like a jerk. And it's quite subtle, but if someone tells you something and there's a dialogue option to ask more about it, he becomes quite... there are some conversations that get quite philosophical about, the nature of humanity and government and how people should live and stuff. And the more you click on those options, the further down those dialogue trees you go, the more kind of forthright JC will get with his own input. He'll put a suggestion to the person and kind of get involved a bit more with the debate. And it feels like the game is kind of sensing, this person actually wants to have a proper debate about this, so we'll stop being a blank protagonist and we'll start actually participating in it. And then there's other stuff like, again, coming back to Liberty Island, your mission is to subdue or get the terrorist leader to surrender. And when you do, a UNATCO agent comes up behind you and tells you, it kind of relieves you of duty and says that they'll come in and clear up the rest. But you can kill that guy. And if you kill that guy, then when you go back to base to report it, debrief, then Mandalay says, do you know what happened to the agent we sent up to relieve you? And you're like, he hasn't reported in. And JC will cover for you, like he'll lie for you and say, no, I didn't see him. And so I had that feel of like, this guy, JC Denton, as a sort of entity, doesn't really know what I'm thinking or what I'm planning, but whatever I do, he'll kind of just go along with it. And like, if I just killed someone who's on my side, he won't ask me why. He'll just quietly cover for me and just say, no, I didn't see anything about that.
Just that kind of non-conspicuous of feeling of, I don't know what happened to you.
Yeah.
Just like that. What other characters in the game kind of stood out for you as well?
I tend to respond most to like the interactive parts of the game, and so the sort of the pre-written story I'm not that interested in. So I can't even remember the arch villain's name. I want to say his name is Bob. Him and Simon's. I didn't care about. I really can't remember his name. I'm just going to call him Bob. I didn't care about Bob, but I did have a kind of ongoing relationship with Simon's because he's. Kind of involved in UNATCO, and you run into him several times, and those scenes are interactive. You get to decide what to say to him, and you can also kind of again push the boundaries of what the game will let you do. And Simon's is like cooler than you, and just completely unimpressed by everything. Just has an even less impressed voice, and I think it's the same voice actor actually. And he's a jerk and completely dispassionate, doesn't care about anything. And I managed to get into a situation where what I'd done was so unexpected and so outside the realm of normal human behavior that even Walton Simon said, Jesus Christ, Denton. And it was one time when you return to UNATCO HQ, he's going to interrogate some prisoners. He kind of like, I think just as you arrive, he arrives too, and he's got some men in black with him. Or maybe you just see the men in black actually, and they say like, don't disturb Simons. He's got some important interrogations to do in the prisoner wing. And so I went to the prisoner wing naturally, and you can. He's in a cell with 2 NSF agents, I think, and is interrogating them and asking them stuff about, their operations. And I think if you just sort of walk there at a normal pace, the door is sealed, so you can't intervene. It's behind bulletproof glass and stuff. But if you really sprint, you can get into the cell before the door closes, and so you're in there when he interrogates them. And I sprinted in there and then took out my flamethrower and burnt both of them to the ground, which was just in the spirit of experimentation, really. I just wanted to know what I could and couldn't do. And I knew I couldn't attack Simons, because I think, certainly he'll attack back, and I think he's invincible. But if you set light to his prisoners, then he just turns and said, "Jesus Christ, Denton." And that was that made it a really memorable character moment, because that's a guy where, in any non-interactive medium, and even in most games, an unflappable character is completely unflappable, and they'll never be flapped because the writer has decided that they'll never be in a situation that could possibly flap them. But in a game that lets you be a bit more interactive and lets you kind of accounts for your behavior, even if you go completely mad, it's great to kind of find out, what would Simon say if I just did something so fucking mad that no one could possibly go without commenting on it.
WWSD. What would Simon do? So moving on from Deus Ex 1 then, moving on to Invisible War, you mentioned the amount of time spent with the demo, the 20-minute rant I got you the PC Gamer gig. What stuck out for you in terms of Invisible War? And it was like you'd mentioned the criticism that it got, but what was it that stood out from 2 that what kind of jumped out for you from 2 anyways?
So it is a very different game, and I think if it had been released under a different name, if it was just called Invisible War and didn't have the Deus Ex name attached to it, I think it would have been much better received, because it's a far future sci-fi game, so it's totally divorced from the kind of real world feel of Deus Ex. It does have the same kind of tactical flexibility, and that's why I still really loved it. It's kind of goes further, and actually the upgrade system, the orgs in Deus Ex 2 are way better than Deus Ex 1's. Deus Ex 1's, I barely used them because they were so just superfluous to the central equation of the combat, and some of them were terrible, some of them were grossly overpowered. There's one that heals you that makes you almost invincible in Deus Ex 1. And Deus Ex 2, they seem much better thought out, and you had to make kind of difficult choices about which ones you took. And there was a great one that added a little bit of EMP to your melee attacks. And so that meant you could my favourite weapon in it was the Tonfa baton, which is like a T-shaped kind of truncheon thing that you essentially works like a punch, and you just kind of hit them with a bit of the stick when you punch people. And I found that incredibly satisfying. And as I said before, I modded the damage values in Deus Ex, in Deus Ex 2, because it really, like a lot of people, it really bothered me that shooting someone in the head didn't kill them. That seems like, I think at the time that was like a religious edict for me. It had to be true, otherwise it wasn't a good game. And so I multiplied the damage that you dealt and the damage the enemies dealt until that was true. And that also meant that punching someone in the face would knock them out. And that's incredibly satisfying. That was way cooler than any melee attack in Deus Ex 1. And it also had Ragdoll, which Deus Ex 1 didn't have. So you could, when you did knock someone out, they flopped in a kind of hilarious way. And you could drag bodies around and shove them in dumpsters and stuff. And that was great. I remember messing around with the physics system. And again, this is something that makes no sense at all. But as I said earlier, one of my favorite anecdotes of Deus Ex is something that makes absolutely no sense. It's that guard refusing to shoot me when I'm using a computer. And in Deus Ex 2, I figured out a route into a building where you stand on top of a dumpster and you want to get up to this balcony that's above you, but it's too high to jump. But the dumpster opens, and so you can't open it when you're standing on it, but if you jump and then open it, it opens up towards you. And the force that is exerted on that physics object just kind of comes from nowhere. And so the fact that you're standing on it doesn't prevent you from pushing it upwards, which means you can get yourself higher. So you can jump up, open it, it opens into your feet and then pushes you up, and then you jump again from the the opening lid and get up onto a balcony. It had really cool tools like you could model the weapons. So one of the playthroughs I played it through multiple times. One of them was I just took 4 pistols. So the basic pistol, the same item, but just modded in 4 different ways. So I had one that was like rapid fire and every shot split into shrapnel. And the shrapnel one is great because the shrapnel itself doesn't do much damage, but it hits everything. And that means, like, if a guard is carrying a grenade, the grenade is physically there on their belt. And if shrapnel hits their grenade when it's on their belt, it just blows them up. And so anyone who's carrying a grenade who's shot with that pistol, their grenade would just go off. So if it's an explosive grenade, they would just be immediately killed. If it's an EMP grenade, it could hurt. It could deactivate bots that are near them. If it's a spider grenade, then it'll go off and start attacking them. And so there's loads of really rich systems type stuff like that I think people that doesn't get talked about anyway. Like I think the people who like Deus Ex 2 are sort of too scared to talk about it because the hatred for it is so strong. And I agree with almost every criticism of it. I just don't agree that it sort of makes it a terrible game. I just think it makes it less of a logical follow-up to Deus Ex and more of its own thing. One of the things that was absurd about it in a bad way was the way they pitched it was, so you know how in Deus Ex you're working for UNATCO, but then you find out NSF are the good guys, and so you join them. Well, we're going to make a game where at that point you can decide to stick with UNATCO and play the whole game through as just UNATCO. And so, like, the choice is we don't force you down one route or another. You can always choose. And it's true, you can always choose. But they took that to an extreme that just made no sense. So you can always choose at any time. And at any time you can switch sides, and then you can switch back again, and then you can switch back again. And no one will ever hold it against you in any meaningful way. They will only ever just gripe about it. They'll say, but you work for these guys. All right, but here's your next job. And they wanted to give you so much choice that your choices had no consequences whatsoever. And so at one point, there's 2 of the world leaders turn out to be married to each other secretly. And they're sort of ostensibly rival factions, but you can... they're sort of secretly working together to bring the world into unity or whatever. And because it's built in the spirit of Deus Ex, you can kill one of them, and you're sent to rescue her. But because it's not in a safe area, it's in a combat zone. I think you can even she's in like a gas chamber, and I think you can just gas her using a computer, or you can rescue her and then kill her. And in the spirit of experimentation, I tried that. I tried killing her, and just to find out what the guy who sent me to rescue her, who is her husband, would say. And he says, "Oh, you're a monster, and I hate you, but we do need you. So here's your next mission." I just murdered your wife for no reason, and you're still giving me the option to carry on working for you guys. Like, there's a point when I think maybe the faction should just say, "Fuck off." Just get out of my sight.
Oh god, I must play Deus Ex 2 now. When you pull that out, you've completely sold me on playing it. I have it on Steam, and I've yet to play it. So I think after this, I'm definitely going to go and play it now. Human Revolution, and like you said yourself, like you were kind of debating between either Deus Ex 1 or Human Revolution being the kind of main focal point for this episode. But like, and like I said, Human Revolution is like the one that I've most played. Like, I think I've played about, I'm thinking three quarters finished the game on Xbox 360, and I've played about a quarter of the game on PC anyways. And like, Human Revolution, like, it was such a massive undertaking, especially for an upstart studio like Eidos Montreal, because like Eidos Montreal were completely unproven at that point. They had no games out at that time up until Human Revolution. So like talk of your experience with Human Revolution, but also like that kind of pressure like Eidos Montreal must have faced with Human Revolution, because like I said, it was their first game, but they pulled it off so well. Yeah,
it's a miracle. I saw it as a journalist at a preview, and I think it was the first time they'd ever shown any gameplay from it at all. Like, until then, it'd just been sort of these very vague statements they'd made, and I was there with Will Porter, who's also a massive Deus Ex fan, and we're both. I don't think either of us expected it to be good. I think we were both like. I was kind of in Deus Ex 2 mode, so I was like, I love Deus Ex. I know this isn't going to be Deus Ex, but I'm open to it being something else. If you want to take some lessons from Deus Ex and make something else, then I'm interested in that as well. And then when they actually showed it, it was just like you kept waiting for it to go wrong. Like every part of the demo I watched, I was like, when is it going to get shit? It's not shit yet. It's really good. And it looked like all of the kind of open-endedness of Deus Ex, but everything you did in it was cool as well. So like when you do sneak up on someone and shoot them in the head, it's with a badass silenced pistol that just makes the perfect sound, and the ragdoll flops in the perfect way. And instead of, there are plenty of vents in it, but they're not the only alternate routes in. And so like stacking a box on top of another box to reach a window and then opening the window. I think both me and Will kind of nerded out at that moment because stacking boxes is kind of like one of the principal ingredients of a Deus Ex game. But then also just, I couldn't think if I'd even seen anyone open a window in a game before as like an infiltration method. When I came out to the window, I was expecting him to smash it. And then I realized, oh no, you can just open windows. So that's all the thing you can do. And it just looked like, all of that stuff that I love, but done in a much more slick way. And for the most part, it was, once I actually played it, I absolutely loved it. And it just had that feel of having all these options, but all those options are really cool. And probably the biggest difference is in melee stuff, which is actually like I kind of focused on melee stuff in Deus Ex 1, even though it was garbage. It was like the feel of hitting someone in Deus Ex is so bad. It's just like the police baton makes a kind of whoo noise when you attack with it, and when it hits someone, it makes this like terrible kind of clack that doesn't feel at all impactful, and then maybe they sort of go ooh and fall over, or maybe they don't. And stabbing someone with a knife has almost no effect. Crowbar was kind of satisfying. That was one of the only ones that was actually good to use. Then you get like the Dragon's Tooth nano sword, and it looks like a lightsaber that could scythe through any flesh, but instead you just kind of whack people with it and go whoop, 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 and they take a little bit of damage each time. And so it's all kind of pathetic. And then Human Revolution went all out on that and did like third-person cutscene takedowns for which I thought were going to feel out of place, but actually in game I kind of liked them. And the animations were so brutally horrible that I was always just watching in a mixture of like horror and delight. I was like appalled at what was happening, but also kind of thinking like, wow.
What else did you like about Deus Ex 1 that we've not talked about?
I guess I did kind of mention this, but the one of the reasons that Human Revolution doesn't totally surpass it for me is that direct action is not really viable in Deus Ex 1, and it is in Human Revolution, and that I totally understand why they do it, and I think it might even be the right move for the series in terms of it's going to make it more popular because people want to play it as a shooter. But it just slightly undermines the clever solutions when you do come up with a really innovative way to get past a situation. The fact that deep down you know you didn't have to do that takes a little bit away from that feeling of like, I solved it. Whereas in Deus Ex, the crazy solutions I came up with, the ridiculous things that I pulled off, I had to do them. I was in a situation where I was going to die if I didn't do that. And so it felt really satisfying to know that my ingenuity is what saved me here. Whereas in Human Revolution, your ingenuity is kind of performative. You're sort of doing it to show off. It's like, I can do it in this really clever way, and look at how clever it is. And it feels great, and it is still really satisfying. But there's always that knowledge that I could have just shot him. I've got a silent pistol. I could have just shot him, and I could have shot everyone else.
What else, or rather, what didn't you like about Deus Ex?
No, that's a good question. For ages, I sort of defended it as perfect because I kind of felt like, although it's not that it doesn't have flaws, it's more that the flaws are just so small compared to any other game's flaws that it has a bunch of stuff about it that I don't care about that is bad. So like every character is really stiff. I don't really care about that. The animation's pretty bad. It sort of looks very awkward and not very natural. There are some sections of the game that kind of drag. There's bits like when you go to Nicolette de Claire's house and kind of try and uncover the mysteries of the mansion, it's sort of becoming a completely different game, and it's kind of it's fine for a bit of a story. Like, this is a little thing that happens in the story, but making it part of the game means that I'm the kind of person who likes to play through the games I like multiple times, and I don't want to replay that section ever again, really. There's no point. It's not terrible, I just don't have any interest in it, so it's kind of wasted space. I said before, like, the way they handle Paul's death or not death is completely false and absurd, even though, like, the fact that he can die or not die is great, and that scene is great. You know, having to fight your way out or not is great, but you basically, the actual mechanics for what determines whether he dies or not are total bullshit. I guess I've already covered that the melee combat is terrible. I guess that's one of the things that it didn't bother me when I was playing it, but once I see it done well in Human Revolution, now I realise, the game could have been better if that was better. It's tempting to say stuff like the shooting could be more satisfying, but I kind of think it shouldn't be satisfying. I think if you're shooting, you're sort of doing it wrong. Well, not in all cases, but there's the principle on which BioShock was built was kind of, we want to do an immersive sim, but it has to work as an action game. It has to be a satisfying action game to play. And I'm glad that Deus Ex 1 isn't. I'm glad that you just can't play it that way.
What for you is the legacy of Deus Ex?
I think we're only just starting to see it, really. Like I said, I think BioShock was the game that sort of took the ingredients of the immersive sim and repackaged them in a way that was palatable to the mainstream audience. And then after that, it wasn't so much that, like, BioShock taught people that immersive sims could be good. It was more like loads of game designers who'd really wanted to make an immersive sim for years, I think, suddenly got permission to. I think they suddenly could point to a game and say, hey, look, BioShock sold really well, and that had all these elements. That had all these complicatedly interacting abilities and stuff like that. And I wouldn't be surprised if Human Revolution owes a bit of its existence to BioShock. Like, the fact that they were able to do it that way and sort of really make a point of staying true to the original's virtues. I can easily imagine that they would have been under more pressure to make it less Deus Ex-y if BioShock had never happened. So yeah, it was kind of like a slow burner, I think. For a long time, to me, it didn't seem like it was catching on. It wasn't sort of changing the way other people made games in any major way. And then it sort of slowly, the fact that so many people love it, and so many, particularly game designers, I think, like Spelunky and Deus Ex are very common favorites among game designers. It's kind of slowly kicking into gear. Now it feels like a renaissance for the immersive sim. We're getting, Dishonored's a big name. BioShock is still a big thing. Deus Ex is getting its fourth game. And yeah, it feels like everyone's got permission to make these games, and it's great.
I think we can pretty much know this by now, but just to kind of confirm the ranking, top 3 DX games, 1, 3, 2, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Honorable mentions. Go for it.
I'm gonna have to say Metal Gear Solid 5. I've been playing that to death in probably at least 40 hours now, and usually it would be risky to pick something that you're playing right now because that you're just discovering.
And it's so recent, yeah.
Because you get so caught up in the moment, but it's hard to imagine this not becoming one of my favorite games of all time. It's got all the things I like about Far Cry 3 and 4, which previously I've ranted on about the outposts in Far Cry 3 in particular, and 4, which are just like, they're not missions, they're just a settlement of guards with though if you take them all out, then it tells you you've taken them all out, and if you do it stealthily, you get a bonus, and so on and so on. And Metal Gear has that, but kind of, they feel much more designed, and they feel much more they're sort of visually striking and unique, and the set of tools you have is really good. and it's all just in this one massive open world. And I haven't really nailed down why it feels so much more like an open world than Far Cry 3 and 4 did, but somehow it does. And the way you can, the fact that you can steal things, you can just attach balloons to things to steal them, changes how I think about all of the enemies. You're always scanning enemies to figure out whether they're worth abducting or whether you should just kill them. And so the lethal, non-lethal debate is kind of always going on rather than being something that you just decide with your playstyle. And it's really, really satisfying to play. It's extremely forgiving, which I really like. Like when you get spotted, you get loads and loads of chances to recover and chances to avoid it and control it. And there's just so much of it. I've just been playing for so long, and I haven't finished the main missions, and I certainly haven't finished the side ops. And I gather you later get a chance to kind of go back and replay those missions with harder enemies and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to that. And like the other games in this genre, I mean, Far Cry 3 and 4, I guess, did last a long time, but it was always like you do the outpost because you just can't do the main missions because the main missions are just so bad. And Metal Gear Solid, to a bizarre extent, the main missions are just like the outposts. Like sometimes they just literally go to the outpost that you were at 5 minutes ago, and instead of stealing a thing you stole 5 minutes ago, steal this other thing. And for some people really don't like that. For some people have complained that it's repetitive because if you do things in the wrong order, or if you happen to have already explored the area that they're sending you to, then it's you're repeating yourself. But the actual challenge of getting into that outpost is different every time, and I love that stuff. All I want from games like this, once you have a tool set that's really broad and diverse and interesting, and stealth mechanics and enemies that are good that are kind of vigilant and difficult to get around and provide real obstacles, then all I want from the game from that point is just let me play the game, let me play this, and I don't mind if you repeat me playing this, and I don't mind if I have to come back to the same area a bunch of times. I just want those rules to be consistent, and I don't want you to interrupt me with some story bullshit where you suddenly say, oh, but now suddenly you decide to shoot the prisoner, or suddenly these guys show up and they are not subject to any of the methods that you've used until now. And Metal Gear does do that, but it only does it like in the first sort of 30 hours I played it. It did it about 3 times, and each time was about 5 minutes. And so it was like 15 minutes of shit for 30 hours of brilliance. And so the ratio is just extremely favourable.
What honourables would you have in there? You mentioned like a big influence, and like it's certainly going by Twitter and the videos you put out a while back, about a few years ago, for a daily challenge, Spelunky.
Yeah, that's definitely in the top 5. I've played that, I think, about 4,000 times. Like, not completed it 4,000 times, but just, I've had 4,000 lives, because it keeps track of it, but I've played it across various different versions and different platforms, and I think each one's been about 1,000 each. And it's just the game that's eternally fresh, just always generating new levels, and always create new challenges. And it's weird because it's the game that inspired Gunpoint, but then I sort of ignored a lot of its lessons for Gunpoint. Like the main lesson from Spelunky is random generation is amazing, and if you do it right, it can keep your game fresh forever. And then I didn't do random generation because I thought I wouldn't be able to. I thought it'd be too hard. And I'm only just now sort of trying to learn from that lesson and do random generation in heat signature. And I'm still, a complete novice at it, so I haven't figured out how to make it brilliant. The daily challenge actually was a huge part of Spelunky's appeal, because it became like a community. We were, I was posting videos myself doing it, but then so were all my friends, and we made a little site together, and we would all post our attempts at the same challenge. And it was great to, having played it, go and watch other people play it and see, oh, you should open that crate, man, there's a jetpack in there, or see that they did way better than you, or it became like a real activity. I love the it's actually very systems-driven game like Deus Ex. It's very about consistent rules and letting you combine the things it gives you in any way that makes sense, and figuring out that, like, one of my favorite moments. I can't remember. I think I've just wrote a blog post about this. I sort of covered it in some way. I don't think I videoed it, but I was in the black market, which is just a series of shops that are in a secret level that is hard to get to, and you can buy almost anything there if you have enough money. And but it's also a level, so there are enemies in it, and most of the time it doesn't matter. They're just like frogs hopping around on the outskirts, and you either deal with them or ignore them. But there are also sort of tribesmen who throw boomerangs around, and so if they see you, they throw a boomerang at you. So obviously you don't want them to throw a boomerang at you, and you particularly don't want them to throw a boomerang at the shopkeeper, because if he hits the shopkeepers just go crazy. If they're ever injured for any reason, all of them go mad forever and will just jump around firing shotguns in random directions for the rest of their lives. And that didn't happen, but one of them had thrown his boomerang at something and it hadn't come back. It bounced off something. I can't remember why, but it didn't go back to him. And so he's walking around without a boomerang. And I happen to know that they will, if they happen to walk past their boomerang later, they'll pick it back up. And if you drop a boomerang, they'll pick that up if they don't have one. And they're just people who want boomerangs. If they don't have a boomerang, they'll pick up a boomerang. And I saw him walk. He'd lost his boomerang, and they walked into a shop. And I realized the shop was selling a boomerang. And when a shop sells something, it's just lying on the ground. And you can pick it up, and you can, if you're the player, when you pick it up, you can then buy it and legally own it. And then if you leave the shop, they don't attack you. But if you leave the shop without paying for it, then the shopkeepers go fucking crazy, and all of them go fucking crazy. And I was nowhere near this guy. He was like 3 levels below me. But I could see this happening, and I could see he was going towards a boomerang. And I realized he's going to pick up the boomerang. And then after he picks up the boomerang, he's going to walk out of the shop. And he's definitely not going to pay for it. And I'm pretty sure that if shopkeepers get angry when I do that, they're going to get angry when the enemies do that, because Spelunky's about consistent rules. And so I just saw it, just like had this chill of fear go through my whole body of like, oh my god, in like 6.5 seconds, the entire world is going to be chaos. And nobody knows this yet except me. And so I just like scampered out of the shop and scrambled up a ladder and hid behind like a mound of mud and just like hugged the ground and just prayed that I wouldn't die. And sure enough, I ran away so far that he was off screen, so I didn't even see it happen. But yeah, 6 seconds later, every shopkeeper goes fucking crazy and starts firing shotguns in every direction. One guy killed the slave that he was selling and then kept shooting his corpse. Another guy shot his dog. 2 shopkeepers shot each other. It was just absolute chaos.
Oh god! Just talking about that. Just listening to you talk about that just reminds me of how amazing Spelunky is and just how unpredictable it can be. Oh, I really need to play it again. I really do. So I think it would be fair to say that if I were to ask you top 3 games ever, they would be Deus Ex 1, Deus Ex 3, Spelunky, more or less in that order.
Yeah, I guess the other one is Hitman Blood Money. I haven't really given a lot of thought as to whether that's better than Spelunky or not, because Spelunky I've played a lot more in recent years. But Blood Money was incredible, and that was one where every mission of that. I would play through like 15 different times and try different methods, and very, very similar to the appeal of all these other games we've been talking about, where there's so many different ways to approach the mission and so many different play styles you can adopt. I think, yeah, hard to say. But yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that listing. Yeah, so heat signature is the main thing, and that's its website is heatsig.com, sig as in the start of signature, and it's also heatsig on Twitter. I'm Pentadact on Twitter, which is Pentadact, and my account is like general stuff, and heat signature's account is for actual development stuff, and I'm much more kind of trigger happy with just like complaining about coding problems I'm hitting and sort of more development insight stuff on there.
Thanks for listening to My Favourite Game. As you may have spotted with Tom Francis on, we would have had the opportunity to talk about Heat Signature, but unfortunately due to time constraints I've had to pull that out of this episode. Luckily I have that segment elsewhere on the My Favourite Game website, so you can listen to it in its entirety at myfavouritegame.net. Anyways, next week, Daniel Cito on Final Fantasy VII. Until next week, bye bye.